afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mind.Split Cafe. Matt, what's going on?
Hey guys, what's going on? Mind Splitters? How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing phenomenal, and I'm super excited about today's episode. We have Dr. Weiner back with us. Dr. Weiner, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back.
Dr.
Yeah,
Weiner, so good to see you again. How's everything in Chicago? Is it snowing up there?
As we record this, it is quite literally 58 degrees on February 8th. I think the groundhog did see a shadow, so this is consistent with what we should expect, but wasn't expecting nearly 60 degrees in February. But,
Yeah.
it's all right. It's all right.
Well,
that's actually very impressive.
it's about to get cold for one I believe y'all's Chicago Bears quarterback, because y'all have the first pick in the draft, and he is like, they don't know who they're gonna take. Caleb Williams might come on. They might get rid of the Justin Fields. Like, it's a cold Chicago for Justin Fields right now. So,
Oh my gosh, yeah. I know we weren't necessarily looking to turn this into like a sports podcast, but it's definitely the buzz of the town. I think, to be honest, it's a good time to be a Bears fan. I think whatever happens is going to be exciting. It'll be fun to watch. Hopefully, we won't have our spirit crushed as it is almost every year, but it's an exciting time.
Yeah, well, I just, we were talking about last time you were on, we were talking about like gambling and that sort of thing, and the addiction to sports betting and so forth. And so that's why it just kind of, and then the trade deadline in the NBA, the Bulls didn't make any moves. They didn't trade any of y'all's good players. Y'all could have got some draft picks. But anyway, so that's not. Anyway, so let's get into it. Let's jump into it. I'm ready.
All right.
Yeah, so, last time we had you on, we're going to consider this a part two of Dr. Weiner. So last time that we had you on, we discussed a bunch of different things, but we kind of ended with the addiction of online gambling and other online games. So I wanted to start off there. I know I follow you on LinkedIn. Your presence in LinkedIn is massive. I love the articles you post, and I just wanted to start off with one of these articles. And it was by a survey from saying that only 2% of parents of teens know or think their kids are gambling online. So let's start off there and then kind of see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So gambling and online gambling is something that has really exploded over the last 5 years after a Supreme Court decision allowed for lots of different forms of gambling to happen. Sports betting, we've seen a lot of both
Mm-hmm.
now in a bunch of states, but then also from your phone. And that's where things start to get really dicey because 95% of kids, of teenagers, say they have a smartphone. And so when you combine that with then all the potential dangers, and obviously gambling is only one of them, but it's actually very easy for young people to access this. And in that post you were mentioning, the reason why I felt the need to juxtapose that 2% was that of parents that think that their kids are gambling is that there was a survey done last year that found that 60 to 80% of kids say that they've gambled at least once in the
Wow.
last year. Yeah,
Dang.
so when you see that the kids themselves are saying, between 3 to 4 out of every 5 kids say that they've done this at least once, and only 1 out of 50 parents says, I think my kid has done this, there's a pretty large gap there where I think there's a lot going on underneath parents' awareness right now on phones.
Yeah, absolutely. And those numbers are astonishing. That's a huge gap.
It is. ESPN just did it like a little. I mean, obviously the Super Bowl is coming up. I don't know when whoever listens to this, but the Super Bowl is this Sunday. But ESPN just did a segment for SportsCenter about college kids and the ramp up of sports betting amongst 18, 19, 20-year olds, 21-year olds, right? It just it's taken to another level, right? Even though they're only 18, 19, they were still gambling. Whether it was just it was a fascinating kind of piece that ESPN did. And what's ironic now is ESPN has its own line, right? ESPN Bet.
Yeah.
And so now you have a huge media company that is in the business of sports, right? And showing and telling stories, and and now they're on the other side too, because now you can place bets on said sports that they're showing, and so it is a conundrum,
I think a lot of it comes back to a question I think all these businesses have to make of how do we want to make our money? Actually, honestly, same things in terms of how states are doing it. Like what is that balance we want to strike between the cost to the public versus the money that we would make off of potentially whatever percentage of people develop a problem here. And I think that particularly when it comes to betting on phones, what's so difficult is that, like, say there's someone who might have the propensity to develop a gambling disorder or a problem gambling behavior. Maybe they're just betting like casually with friends, nothing too much. They might have to really go out of their way to bet large amounts of money in the past. They'd have to like go to a casino or like really track down how would I lose. Right. Now you literally just pull out your phone and you can blow thousands of dollars and chase your losses and do all of that literally from the palm of your hand. And that's what's so threatening from a health perspective about all of this.
I'm glad you mentioned chasing your losses. I wanna harp on that one real quick, because that's something that everyone that gambles pretty much does. You see your money go away and you're like, oh well, this next bet I can cover that and make a little profit. So what happens in our brain when we're chasing it? What's the behavior behind it? What's the psychology behind that part?
Right. Well, so first off, that behavior is actually of chasing losses is one of the diagnostic criteria for how you diagnose problem gambling. And it's this idea that despite the fact that if you think logically about it, how could I logically make this money back? Like that's not the way the system is set up. Like the sports betting websites, casinos, all of it, they're designed such that the house always wins, right? That they're going to come out ahead in the end. Yet there's this feeling like you can do it, and part of it's because you can, whether or not it's with like a multi-leg bet called a parlay, where you can win a lot of money by guessing a lot of things right, or even if you say make back a little bit of it, like maybe you've lost $500 and then you win 150, and you're like, oh man, great, I'm on my way. But not really, right? You're still, maybe you got 150 back. You're still down 350 if you lost $500, and then you're going to lose more, and you're going to find that you're down 7, 8, $100, $1,000, and you never actually get back to where you thought you were. Or, and this is the kicker, even if by some miracle you actually made it back to zero, you will probably turn right back around and lose it all again. Because at that point,
you're chasing that juice. You get back to it, and then you're like, hey, I figured it out. I figured it out, and I can be profitable in this, right? Because I got back from this hole. So now I'm like, all right, I dug myself out of this hole. I think I figured it out. It's like I don't know how many of our listeners or if y'all play golf, but I absolutely am not, I'm not a pro at golf, and I'm a decent athlete. But I get so frustrated playing golf until I hit that one shot on the golf course, and it hits the pin, or I hit that putt, or the drive goes right down the fairway, whatever it is. That's my shot. That's my shot that keeps me coming back. So I think it's kind of like the same lines, Doc, is that, all right, I dug myself out of this hole. I figured this whole gambling thing out. Now I'm going to be profitable. I'm going to be a professional gambler type thing, So it is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
That makes sense.
So, and it's go ahead. In the paradigm, I guess really at the heart of it, what's so important to remember about this, with so many of these addictive problems, and I know for listeners who tuned into the last episode, I don't want to retread too much ground, but all of this is based on business, and the question of like the whole paradigm is actually based around how do we as businesses make money off of people who are engaging in this behavior. And yes, there might be some elements that are fun for people while they're doing it, but that's not why it exists. It doesn't exist to provide fun. It exists to provide profit to the people running the system, and you are just living inside that system. And the deeper people get and the more problems they have, the more they start to see how all of these different factors, from promotions, where they'll literally give you bonus bets, quote unquote, to they don't actually give you your money back. So basically, what that means is if you lose, they will give you free bets to bet again to chase your losses, but you still lost the money. Like if you lose $500, they don't put that back in your account. They just let you bet $500 more with them, which probably won't hit, and and then you've started that cycle. Or tier levels where you have to lose tremendous amounts of money in order to get more rewards to get you to bet more. It's all set up so that you get those little dopamine hits along the way, so that you will give the institution more of your money. And I think as soon as you can see that, that allows you to then decide how you're going to engage with it, which isn't to say no one can ever gamble, no one should ever gamble. There's a lot of people who engage in gambling who don't develop disorders. But when you're not aware of the system, it's a lot easier to hit that point where you go over the edge, and then things can start to get really dicey.
At Palms Behavioral Health, we understand the journey to mental wellness. Our dedicated team offers personalized care for adolescents, adults, and seniors. We focus on individualized treatment plans, addressing a wide range of mental health needs. Our evidence-based practices and trauma-informed care ensure sensitive and effective treatment. Palms Behavioral Health, healing minds, empowering lives. Contact us today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then they send guys like Sammy the Butcher after you to break the knees, right?
Make sure you pay up.
Yeah.
So you said that people gamble and they don't develop an addiction to it, repeated gambling that's causing negative effects. So kind of going to substance abuse real quick. In substance abuse, there's harm reduction. If you're not ready to quit, you can't quit. There's harm reduction tools that you can do in order to use safely until you're ready to quit. Now, this might be a weird question, but is there harm reduction type tips for gambling?
Oh, absolutely there are. And so you're spot on. Like with any other behavior or substance, a lot of people who engage in gambling, again, alcohol can be the same way, for example, THC can be the same way, where they don't have an active addiction, even if they are using it sometimes. And that's absolutely how it is for a lot of people. And even some people who have problem gambling patterns can potentially pull back. My take on, say, moderation or safer practices, whatever the addictive behavior is I think people need to just be honest with themselves about results. There's some people who are capable of engaging in that sort of behavior and getting the outcomes they want in life. There's other people who try it and find that it just doesn't work. Like they start going down that road and they're right back off to the races again, and their life is exploding. And you just kind of have to learn what works for you, so that you accept whatever limits you're putting on yourself, whether or not it's very like all or nothing, like I'm never gambling again, or whether it's somewhere in the middle. But examples of safer gambling habits can be having a very set amount of, like, I'm going to walk into the casino, or I'm only going to spend this much gambling, almost like you're buying a ticket to a show. Like this money is for entertainment. If I lose it and it was entertaining, that's what I came here for. If I make money off of it and it was entertaining, that's what I came here for. That's one way you can do it, is have a very set cap, as an example. To notice if you are starting to chase your limits would be another example of how to do it. Ultimately, it's really just about awareness and seeing why you're doing what you're doing, and whether or not you can stay within kind of like the pocket that you create for yourself, or whether you consistently don't stay within those limits, or you're feeling this push to go past them every time you start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that idea of creating some sort of bankroll and not going above and beyond the bankroll limit, and kind of have it reset every week or something. Every week I can only spend this much. If I lose on Monday, I'm done. I like that idea. That's definitely harm reduction for the pocketbook.
Now, and I understand what you're saying, and I'm just trying to play devil's advocate too. Like,
sure,
if you are an addict, what are the honest chances that addict is going to behave within those parameters, right? Like Chris said, okay, I set my budget, I lose that on the first day. An addict's not going to be able to say, okay, you know what, guys, I'm calling it a week. I'll see you back in 6 days. Like, what are the real chances that, and I don't mean to argue with you, Doc. I'm just saying, like, what are the real possibilities that an addict is going to follow said guidelines, you know, if they don't hit those guidelines? You know what I'm saying?
Good question.
Yeah, so my hunch, and I say hunch because I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, is that would be a lower percentage of folks than the general population. Because if you've already gotten into a habit of saying, I am going to chase dopamine hits, or I get my fun by trying to like enhance what, like, it's not just that I'm going to hang out with my friends, it's that I'm going to hang out with my friends and get intoxicated. Or so it's not, I'm just going to watch a game, but I'm going to bet on a game. You've got this behavioral pathway that you've already started down, and this just could feed right into it. And if that's the case, absolutely that could be a problem. Maybe you don't want to play with fire that way. Maybe it feels like this is a risk that you don't need to take. That said, there might be some people. I never like to necessarily make rules for everybody. I think that everyone has to kind of figure out for themselves what sorts of risks they want to take. If they have accountability metric, like is there someone who can call them on it if it seems like, hey, it looks like you're starting to get a little compulsive about that gambling. But yeah, generally speaking, if you know that you tend to have an addictive personality, saying like, hey, I'm gonna go dip my toe in a different addictive pool and see what happens, like, it's possible it doesn't end badly, but it's also possible that it does.
Yeah, that makes sense. So and we kind of hit on this at first, but the integration of the internet and platforms to gamble on a phone has caused or exacerbated the gambling problem, quote unquote. But is there a technology or something within technology that can help mitigate addiction related issues?
So that is an interesting question. So there are some apps that are out there that try to help with putting up barriers essentially between you and gambling. But the hard part is that you can always remove them. If we're talking about gambling specific, there's always ways around almost every roadblock you can put up, unless you are again, in the case of gambling, self-excluding through your social security number. Like that one, if you say, for the rest of my life, I cannot come to this vendor and do this, that's a little bit more permanent, but it's still, there's other ones, right? So it's tough. What it really comes back to at the end of the day is the individual and how they are dealing with their demons and how they are dealing with their problems. Because if something is just fun, like if you're telling yourself, I'm just having fun gambling, but you're having fun gambling to the tune of like $100 a week, even, like that's $5,000 a year. You could do a lot with that money. Like there's a lot of hobbies you could have, fun you can have, that wouldn't cost $5,000 a year.
Yeah.
So like if we're really being honest about it, and it's not maybe just for fun, or it's a very expensive sort of fun, maybe there's other ways to get that are healthier, that are more sustainable, that wouldn't cost you $5,000 a year, but maybe would cost you more like $500 a year or $1,000 a year, and might not have those downstream negative effects. People just have to come up with other ways of solving that. And some of those exist on phones, like smartphone apps that do cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness or mood tracking. I mean, there's a whole side of digital therapeutics we could talk about that I think is great that they're on phones. But it's really a double-edged sword. There's a lot of good you can do with the mobile devices, and then there's also a lot of pitfalls.
Yeah,
I'd like to ask you a question. Whose responsibility do you feel that let me rephrase that. The responsibility falls on who to fix the problem. Would it be the government, or would it be the companies themselves that are taking these bets? Or does the responsibility fall on the individual that is placing the bet and that might recognize that he or she has a problem? I'm just kind of curious, because the way I see it is the company is making money, and they're going to be like, all right, well, we'll put out a couple of disclaimers. If you think you got a problem, call this 1-800 number.
Yep.
The government is going to be like, well, we're every state is, under their own kind of regulations and guidelines, and it's up to every state. And they're taking they're taking, kickbacks from lobbyists, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, well, as long as you put out a disclaimer, call this 1-800 number. So then it also kind of, I think it just kind of falls back on the individual user to recognize that, hey, I might have a problem. I need to get this fixed. But when you've got this, 5,000-pound gorilla on your back, so to speak,
Yeah.
is that gorilla really going anywhere with, just kind of, saying, hey, I got a problem. I need to go to therapy and go talk to doc, so.
Right.
I'm just
Well, I mean, I
curious.
think what you're talking about is like this one of those central political questions of like, what is the role of government in public health and policy and behavior within a society? And I mean, I think you ask different people from different political persuasions, you're going to get different answers about where the onus lies. I think when I think though for me personally and about this particular sort of issue, I think I think that history has taught us that if you allow the market to just act as it will, what you're going to get is a lot of human destruction at the expense of profits. I think if you look at big tobacco before it was regulated, I think if you look at what's going on right now in vaping, because it's still not well regulated as well. If you look at what's going on in THC markets, like we talk a lot about that here in Illinois and what's happening, you can go through each one and say, I think that when you just give people free reign to do something, to peddle something addictive without any oversight from a third party that's thinking about like, well, is this really good for people, or should we just grab as much money as we can? Think Purdue Pharma and opioids, even to a certain extent. Matthew Perry dying from using ketamine in a hot tub, and all the things that are going on with mail order ketamine and unregulated ketamine clinics right now. I mean, we could run the gamut in terms of how this works. But when we don't put guardrails on, history tells us that there are bad actors and there's the allure of money, and that tends to take over. And so I personally am one who falls more on the side of, I do think the government needs to put guardrails on what people can and can't do with just some common sense things. Like I mentioned, these bonus bets for getting people into chasing their losses that are literally advertised on social media. I see them on my phone. They're saying like, bet risk free. I think it says it's not risk free at all, actually. And what they're doing is creating an addictive pattern. We allow for that to happen because there's no regulations preventing it. And that's, in my opinion, very predatory behavior. And you're going to get predators when you don't have rules in place that stop people from doing that. And so, again, there's a lot of folks that would say, well, hey, everyone makes their own choices. Adults are adults. I know we're talking about kids today too, and that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But for me, I think we do need regulations on these industries because they have not been uniformly positive actors in the past.
I love that answer, Doc, and I agree with you 1,000%. I agree with you 1,000% because everything you just said is dead on. It's not going to correct itself, and it's only going, the momentum is only going down one path, and that path has in the past shown, whatever industry it is, has shown that it cannot govern itself, so to speak, or it cannot correct itself. And so, before it's too late, something needs to be done. So I 1,000% agree.
Yeah, let me give you a quick example.
It shouldn't fall on just one entity. It shouldn't fall on the user. It shouldn't fall on the company, and it shouldn't fall on government. It needs to be a collaborative effort to get the problem solved.
Right. Well, and I think the parts of the solution can come from different sides. Let me give you an example. So I don't think this has been derailed. So if it has, then I apologize for giving you outdated information. But last I checked, starting in 2026, all new vehicles that are sold in the United States need to have what's called a passive alcohol sensor in it, meaning that it's going to be built into like you press the button to start the car, it can sense your blood alcohol content through your finger. Or they've got some stuff going on with eye tracking, where if you're not focusing properly, it'll be able to tell. Your car will not turn on. And that's because we lose tens of thousands of people every year to motor vehicle accidents caused by drunk drivers. So the idea here is over time, as we get newer vehicles and older ones get phased out, drunk driving will pretty much be a thing of the past because you literally won't be able to start your car if you're drunk. That will save tens of thousands of lives. Now, would companies have done this on their own? Maybe
No.
not, right? Because they haven't already. It
Yeah.
costs money. It takes development. Cars are going to cost a little bit more, probably. Would people
Well,
ask for that in their car?
yeah.
No, they probably wouldn't be like, "Hey, I want the one that won't turn on
Can
if
I
I'm
have
drunk."
that on?
Yeah, yeah. But by requiring it, right, from
Yeah.
policy, that's saying we are not going to be a country anymore that loses tens of thousands of people to drunk driving every year, and we're going to put a policy in place to help with that. So, just one example of how you can use that sort of top level policy to drive health outcomes.
I love that.
That's interesting.
I'm old enough to remember when you could buy a car and air conditioning was an option, you know, or power windows was an option. Like, you remember the cars where you had the
Crank it.
crank it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I remember power windows and air conditioning was an option in the car, right? And now it
Yeah,
comes obviously standard, right? So that's it. I think that's great. You know, that's definitely the regulatory factor of the government saying, hey, this needs to be done in this car industry. We're requiring it. That's awesome. Why can't the government start to implement policies to where, hey, once you get on this gambling site, you need to set the parameters within the app itself, and they cannot be changed. So once you start the app, you know how you put your name in, whatever, and you set that level, and it cannot be changed once the app is in motion, right?
Like let me give you an example of something we could do. What if these apps, once someone, like say someone loses $1,000 a month, 2 months in a row, what if it was required at that point that they present a pay stub that shows that that is not such a sizable part of their income that they're destroying themselves? Or I'm just throwing out numbers here,
I love it.
but like,
That's a good idea.
so that you can
That's
verify,
smart.
like, hey, this person isn't ruining their life on our app or on our service. I don't see why that couldn't be possible. I mean, but again, someone might say, well, what about privacy laws? People should have a right to choose. And I respect that that's an opinion, right? That's personal freedoms and autonomy and really stressing on that. For me, though, I don't know. I would rather have there be some sort of safeguard saying
Yeah.
if someone's exhibiting behavior that's self-destructive, we're just going to stop that. We're not going to facilitate that descent.
Yeah. Or you're only allowed to
that's a
sign
good
up for
idea.
2 apps. Because if those regulatory like parameters were set, and you've met your limit gambling
On
with
one app.
MGM, what are you going to do? You're going to go over to ESPN Bet and open it up an account. So
Yeah.
you based it on a certain, your social security number. You're only allowed to have 2 apps open under one social security number. Now you're, we could go on all day
Information.
about, the
Yeah.
regulatory and how to fix it, but it's definitely a problem. And I think because of the, what is the word I'm looking for? Because of the accessibility of sports betting now, like you talked about before, where they don't have to go find a bookie. They can just create an app or sign up on an app. I think because of the accessibility has now shot up the frequency. Now you have
Absolutely.
a lot more, users, and now it's going to become, it could become a problem. That's my personal feeling.
Yeah, and where,
Yeah,
where
I
are the
agree with
safety
that as well.
nets? I'll give you one more example of things going right. I know there's a lot we can say, like, oh man, what about this in a bad way? But as an example of things going right, we can look at the prescription drug monitoring programs and how that's impacted the opioid epidemic. What these are, I don't know if everyone knows about this, but every time you pick up a prescription at a pharmacy of a controlled substance, whether or not it's an opioid or like a benzodiazepine like Xanax or Klonopin or Adderall, anything that's controlled, that is actually sent back to a record at the state level. And any physician, any prescribing provider, so also like nurse practitioner, physician assistant, can pull that. And actually, a lot of states require, if you're going to prescribe an opioid, you pull that record.
That's
You
why I
log into
choose
it from
meal
the
preps
computer
to
before
go.
you write that new script to see, has someone already picked up opioids from like 4 other doctors before they came in front of you? Or are they getting Xanax from 3 other people? And you can see that. And when you see that, then you can say, then maybe you have a different conversation with the patient and say like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, so it looks like this is going on. Can we talk a little bit about it? Do you need some help? And that's that guardrail that's in place because of the information sharing. So it can come from all sides, right? It can come from IT, it can come from medical providers, it can come from policy level solutions, it can come from someone's own self-awareness. And so like you were saying, it doesn't have to be just one player, but I think the more different tools and guardrails we have in place, the more people we're going to stop from falling over the edge.
Yeah, very good point. That would be an interesting concept of creating something very similar to the prescription monitoring program for gambling. That would be interesting. What are there any specifics? So I know with substance abuse and other mental health therapies, there's several modalities that you can use. There's CBT, DBT, Q exposure, all kinds of things. Is there any specific therapeutic approaches for online gambling or gambling in general?
This is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but it's actually all the same things because the same process is at play. There's always
Yeah.
contextual differences between, like how someone uses alcohol to how someone might use cocaine and, the environment and how you acquire it. And of course, gambling is a very different paradigm, but the psychological pathways and in some ways the behavioral pathways in terms of like I'm going to do this action to create this feeling in myself or I have this ritual of behavior or ritual of use, and that's all part of the system for me. There's more similarities actually than there are differences, at least in terms of the treatment front. And so all those same tools still apply. Cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness work, it all still works.
That's interesting. Yeah, it is kind of not the same well, I guess yeah, the same concept as far as fentanyl addiction and gambling addiction. It still does the same thing in your brain, just a different way, correct?
And from the reward pathway or the I feel I'm feeling negative, so I'm going to go do this thing, whether this thing is gamble or put a drug into my body, and that's going to change my mental state and solve my problem. Or I'm going to engage in this activity and then I'll gain social acceptance with this group of friends that I want to be with, or I'll feel like I'm part and I really just want to feel that sense of connection. People are always trying to solve a problem for themselves, either usually escape from pain or increase pleasure with addictive behaviors. It's just ultimately they're self-defeating, even if in that very close proximity moment you don't feel how much it's hurting you.
Yeah, that was a good answer. I like that. And since we're talking, I think we might be coming close to time, but I did want to get this one out. I know last time we did not ask you this, but I like asking this to a lot of our clinicians that come on. What is your favorite therapeutic approach? Motivational interviewing, CBT, DBT, what is yours and why?
Wow, putting me on the spot, question I was not expecting. What is my favorite? Um, all right. I'm gonna name a couple because that's kind of how I practice. I'm not unidimensional in that way. Like I like to mix and match a bit. So I think
Yeah.
probably the part that I like the most, uh, first and foremost, is the part of sharing information. And so letting people know like what does the process of recovery look like? Or why do you feel the way that you do? Or what medications are available that are going to help with this? Because a lot of times when folks first come to treatment, the entire terrain is unknown. It's like stumbling around in the dark. And so that process of being like, hey, so here's what's out there. Or even when we're talking more of on the emotional side, like really helping people see that connection. This is going into CBT land for a second, cognitive behavioral therapy, but how thoughts actually work on feelings. And that as you start to change your perspective on something, the way you feel is so different. I think probably the most fun I have with therapeutic techniques actually is just your really basic exposure sort of stuff where people actually go and challenge an old belief by testing something out. Like, will this be as bad as I think? Will my anxiety make it so that nobody likes me? Can I get through this without drinking? And then you go and you see that it's not what you thought it was. And you feel so good when you break through a wall like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best. So I mean, there's a lot of other things that I really jive with in therapy. I'm a huge proponent of mindfulness and meditation. I do it myself on a near daily basis, ideally daily, but there's some days that I miss it. There's a lot more we can talk about, but those are probably my favorite.
Yeah, that's an interesting little collaboration of different therapeutic approaches, all rolled up into one. I like that. And for the most part, and correct me if I'm wrong, the gold standard is obviously CBT. A lot of people use CBT, and it kind of fits in for a lot of mental health concerns. But aren't most of the other ones kind of built off CBT as well? It has a CBT component into it?
Some more than others, I think. And some diehards of like what we call third wave therapies, like acceptance and commitment therapy, might be like, no, there's all these fundamental assumptions that are made in CBT, and we do it differently, and that's why this is different. And not to say that there aren't some really valid points that those folks might make. I think ultimately, though, what matters to me as a practitioner is there evidence that shows that the treatment that you're using for for whatever the problem is has that it actually works, and not just that we're riffing like, hey, I really like dialectical behavioral therapy, but it hasn't been done in this context, so I'm going to pretend as if it has and just do it because it seems good and it seems transdiagnostic, but it hasn't really been tested yet. I'm less a fan of that. Or if you're going to do it, just be honest about the fact that it's kind of experimental with the people that you're working with. That's why CBT oftentimes is a go-to. That's why ACT is a go-to. That's why I never hesitate to recommend that people do a peer support community like a 12-step fellowship or smart recovery or refuge recovery. All of these things are highly evidence-based. And so not that every tool is going to work for every individual, but when you have a lot of them in your belt, you can find one that works for, you can find something that works for everybody.
Success is, if you've got a lot of tools in the belt, success is generally follows, right? So yeah, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
The last piece I'll throw out, and I know we're running lower on time, is that part of how I work clinically, I work a little bit different than an average therapist because I don't see patients full time. I do a lot of education and speaking, and the flip side of that is I spend more time with folks. So I'm a very available therapist. I text with people if they need to get in touch with me. Like we have these channels where I can actually stay in touch throughout the week, so people don't feel like they're alone. Or if someone needs to be seen more than once a week or for a 90-minute session, just actually helping someone through something and answering questions, it allows you to go at it in a more iterative way where it's not like you will fit my process, and if you don't fit my process, go somewhere else. It's more like, how can I make myself available to you and work with you because you know where you want to go. It's just a matter of like, do we need a little oomph on the motivational side here with an MI technique, a motivational interviewing technique?
I find that approach. I love that. I really do. Why try to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? Like maybe the normal approach of office hours from 9 to 5, I'll help you during these hours. Maybe that doesn't fit that person. The question I have for you personally, though, is how do you set your boundaries to where you're not working around the clock at 3 o'clock in the morning when this gambling addict or whatever the case, whatever they got going on is coming off of a heater and just blew $3,500 or whatever, and they need to talk to their therapist, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, how do you set those boundaries to where, hey, I'm here for you and I want to help you, but there's got to be a little bit of, give and take a little bit.
Oh yeah. No, it's honestly, it's pretty easy. I let folks know pretty early on. I'm a human being. I've got 2 young kids. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna be answering my phone around dinner time. Like that's when I see them. My phone is absolutely off at night. Like I'm not on call 24/7. But it's more like imagine like if you've got a friend, right? You reach out to them, they're gonna reach back to you. They're not gonna like ignore your call or your message or your text. It's got more of that vibe. And if there's an emergency, like like I'll talk with somebody at night or text like. I'm not going to just like blow them off or something, but no, my phone's off at night.
You set those boundaries clearly. Yeah. I love that. Well, Doc, that's what makes you special. And thank you so much for coming on the show. Again, we told you this last time and then you came back. So you're welcome back anytime. We love talking to you. You were a friend of the show. You're a friend of ours.
Absolutely.
And you're just filled with unbelievable knowledge, and I really appreciate you being here today.
Oh my gosh, of course. Well, hey, maybe we'll have a trilogy in our future, right? Like
We will. We will. We're gonna come back
we
after
already
we
have it
see
set up.
Yeah, you're coming back after the draft to see what your Bears did. So let's
All right. Mind.Split versus Weiner 3. We should make like a poster for it or something.
Oh, we're going to.
Oh yeah,
I got a graphics guy. I'm gonna do it. It's gonna
be
yeah. There might not be any shirts. It'll just be all 6-packs and like
oh.
Yeah.
I like that. Yes. 6-packs, 8-packs, right.
Yeah, 6-packs and heavy artillery and a helicopter. I think that would be awesome. And some explosions.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because
as a dad of 2 young children, I am so ripped you would not believe. You do not want this shirt coming off. But
I love
probably
it.
Probably not for the reason that. Oh man, we're going off the rails here.
Dr. Weiner, thank you so much for joining Mind.Split Cafe this week, and you are a friend of the show, and we appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Weiner, and to our listeners. We will see you next week.
Take care, guys.
Like, we weren't supposed to come up with something this clean. Like, something happened.